Hello class, and welcome to our first lesson in Microsoft Access. This week we're going to do a few simple things in Microsoft Access just so you can get familiar with the environment as we move into this new tool. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. Here you can see the textbook project that you'll be working on this week will ultimately look like this. And here's some of the things you'll have to do to get to that point. First item we're going to do is we're just going to create a database. There are multiple ways to do this. We're just going to create a simple blank database to start out and show some of the stuff that you can do in Microsoft Access, but you can also use templates, which I'll show you as we launch Access. So first thing I need to do is launch Microsoft Access. So I can go to my window button here, or I can just type in Access, and you can see that it shows up in my list of available applications. Now I've launched Microsoft Access, and this is going to look a lot like what we've been seeing in Microsoft Excel when you started from scratch. You'll need to just go ahead and choose to create a blank desktop database. As I was saying, you could also utilize templates. So if you were to build a database that fit one of these categories, this would give you a head start on the structure of your database. So if you were into task management, you could use this template and it would give you some tables and some structure to get started. But in this case, we just want to create a blank database. So I'm going to double click on that. And I now have a blank database. I just spoke about creating them using a template. Those are different options that you have available. Many of them are built in with Microsoft Access, but you can also go online to find additional templates if you don't see something that you would want to utilize. And now just giving you a quick rundown of the Access window. So this area here is what you would call the Access work area, the window on the bottom right, the big white area where I'm currently have my table 1 getting ready to be defined. Object tabs, these items are along the left edge. Right now I only have one object, so it just says table 1, but if I had multiple objects in multiple different types, they would be categorized on this left rail here. The navigation pane is this item down here at the bottom. Going across the bottom, it changes depending what you're connected with, but it gives you a current status of what's going on in your database. And datasheet view and datasheet. I'm currently in datasheet view. If you look way down on the bottom left corner of my screen here, you can see it says datasheet view. I also have this item up here on the left. You're going to get used to seeing this triangle, pencil, and ruler because we're going to see that a lot. But if I hit the pull down, you can see that currently datasheet view is the selected option, and we'll be talking about design view here shortly. Naming tables and fields. So you're going to have to name things as we go through and create these databases. Your tables all have to have unique names, and your fields all have to have unique names, and that's tables have to be unique within the database. Fields have to be unique within the table. And these are some rules that you have to follow. They can be up to 64 characters in length. They can contain letters, digits, and spaces, but not periods, exclamation points, braves, or square brackets, because those are reserved characters. It cannot be used. And as I had said, each field in a table must have a unique name. So if I wanted to create a few things in my table here, you can see the first column's ID. We'll be talking about that shortly. But if I wanted to create a new field, I could just start typing something in, and you can see now it is called field 1. And I can rename it to whatever I want. I just right-clicked on the header and chose rename. Call it my field, and now my field has a name. And that will continue across. As I add more data across, I will get more columns in my table. And when I go to save my table, I can rename it. Determining the primary key. So by default, when a table is created, Microsoft Access will give it a primary key. And essentially what a primary key is just a unique identifier. So not every table has to have a primary key, but many of them do. And it just enforces uniqueness within each row of the table. So you can see here when I created this new table, I was just said a little bit ago about the ID column. Well, this ID is currently the primary key for the table. This will auto number. So if I go down to the next row, you're going to see that if I put my field, make this the number 5, you can see that it's automatically incrementing ID, and I would not be able to force that to be a number that already exists because it is a primary key. It won't let me do that. I can also determine data types for the fields. So there are several data types for these different fields, and they act in different ways. If I want to change the data type of my field, I can just select this column, which is my field in my table, and I can go over here under Table Tools, Fields, and I've got data type here. And currently it figured out that it was a number just based on what was in the field, but I could force that to be something else. Maybe I didn't want it to be treated as a number. I wanted it to be treated as short text or any of these other items, and we'll be hitting some of these other ones as we go, but I can establish a different data type this way. So if I wanted this to be short text, even though they look like numbers now, my database is going to treat them as if they're text. So that's how you change data types. Creating a table. So I've already created a table here. I haven't saved it, but this is a good opportunity to show the difference between datasheet view and design view. And then also here they want me to show you where a caption is. So I'm back on my database, and I'm going to go ahead and close this. And this is something you should see too. Right here I'm in table 1, and it kind of looks like it's stuck here. I don't really have a way to get rid of it. All of my close things are way over here on the right side, so you can see the X. When I go to close this, it's going to ask me if I want to save it. And I'm going to just say yes, and then I'm going to say, Math table, and hit OK. And you can see that now on the left rail here, I've got Math table on my list of different items in my database. And now I'm going to create a new table. So to create a new table, I'm going to go to Create. And then there's several options here, but the first one is Table. So I'm going to create a new table. And now, again, it's called a table 1 by default, but it's not been saved yet until I actually save the table. But I have opened this table, and I'm looking at it in datasheet view. And datasheet view essentially looks like an Excel spreadsheet. So it's kind of like how we're used to seeing stuff in Microsoft Excel. Not all the same functionality, but the same kind of view where it's a grid of columns and rows. But I can also view this table in a different manner by going into design view. So I showed you this before. If I hit the triangle with the pencil and the ruler underneath it, it's in datasheet right now. But I can change that to design view. And I have to save it before it's going to let me do that. So I'm going to call it Math Table 2, because I'm not being very creative. I hit OK. And now this is the same table that I was just looking at, except it's in design view. In design view, I can't put data into my table, but I can more easily establish the fields or columns in my table, as well as the data types. And I have access to multiple different properties for each one of the fields in my table. So you can see I've got ID and auto number. That was the only thing in the table because I haven't put anything in yet. And you can see it's also got this little key here, which is saying that this field or column is the primary key for the table currently. I can go down and add whatever I want, my date, and I could say I want that to be a daytime, my age, and I can say I want that to be a number. And I can continue on and on and on. And all these things are getting added as columns in my table. And the caption item, you can see down below as I click in each one of these fields, there's a list of different options. The options vary based on what data type it is. But if I want to put a caption on my age, I click on my age, and down here on the bottom, I can put, my caption, just like that. So that's how I edit the caption for my field in my table. And once I'm done here, if I want to go back to datasheet view now, I go where the triangle and the pencil and the ruler were before, and now it's showing a datasheet view. And I can click on that. As I flip back, it's going to make me save it. But now you can see I'm back to my datasheet view, but it has my new fields in there that weren't there before. Continuing on, as I've said, the primary key is automatically established by the database. when you create the table, but you can change what you want your primary key to be. Maybe you don't want an auto-incrementing number. Perhaps you want something else to be your primary key for your table. I can adjust that. So if I go back over here, I'm going to take my table back into Design View again by clicking again on that triangle, pencil, and ruler. And in Design View, currently ID is the primary key, but if I wanted to change that, I could right-click on any one of these other fields and choose primary key, or you can see at the top here, I have this option labeled primary key. Once I select that, that becomes my primary key. So that means, in this case, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but my age has to be unique in each row in my table. We can also rename fields in our table. I've already shown you how to do that from Datasheet View, but you can also do that from Design View. So I'm going to go back over to my database, and I'm in Design View right now, and I have that field called my age. And perhaps I didn't mean to put my age, I meant to put my number. I can just edit it right here in Design View, and when I click away, now that's the new name for my field in my table. I go back to Datasheet View. I have to save it, of course. And you can see it now says my caption instead of my it says my caption because I put my caption for the caption. But if I delete that, you can see that it will show in Datasheet View my number instead of what it was before. So now it says my number. As I've shown you before, we can save our table once we're complete editing it. You can either just close it, and if there's any edits, it will ask you if you want to save it, or you can come up here to the top left corner, and there's a save button right here. You click on that, and it will save your table so that your updates are kept as you close your table. We've already talked about viewing the table in Design View. We can change field sizes in Design View. So if you want to perhaps establish a limit to the size of a field, maybe you don't want age to be more than 3 numbers because no one can be 1,000 years old. You can establish that to make sure that bad data doesn't get put into your database. So I'll go back over here, and I'm going to go back into my table that I was already working on, Map Table 2. And I'm going to go into Design View again. And I'm going to change this back to my age for fun. And I'm going to click in here. And down here in the properties, it says field size long integer. I can adjust it that way. And there are several different data types here. But I can also force format. And I can also, if it's a number type, I can only adjust the field size to be a number type as well as a format. But if I change it to a text type field, like let's say I wanted my age to be a short text, then I can limit the field size to a certain number of characters. So now I have a field size limit of 3. And then if I view my table in Datasheet View, and I want to save my table, of course, my age can only contain 3 letters and numbers. Well, they're letters, but they can only contain 3 characters because I have a limit of 3 on that field. We've already talked about closing the table. To add records to the table, I think this one's pretty obvious, but if I go over to my table, and I just start typing in the next row, as I continue to type, it's adding records into the database. Since this is a date field, I have to choose a date. Each time I go to a new row, it's going to it's going to create a new record in the database. I can make changes to the record just like I could anywhere else. I can add records, delete records. I don't think anything would be a surprise here. If I wanted to get rid of a record here, I can right-click, I can choose delete record, and then it's gone. It's going to ask me to confirm that. I can edit any of these fields that I've already typed into, just like you would expect with a table structure like this. I can add records to a table that contains data. I think that's the same thing we've already done, so there's nothing new there. I can resize columns in my data sheet if I want to. That's just a visual thing. If I want to widen them out, I can do that just like we used to do in Microsoft Excel. Preview and print. I guess I can print the contents of a table if I wanted a physical copy of that. That's going to work just like you would expect it to. I've already got my table open. If I go to File, Print, I can choose Print, and then it will print the contents of this table to my printer. Or if I want to see what I'm going to print, I can go to Print, and then Print Preview, and you can see that it's going to print a copy of my table. I can import and link data from other applications to Access. So if I want to import an Excel worksheet, this is a good way for you to pull in external data into your database if you already have an established spreadsheet or some other data source that you want to bring in to a database structure. So I'm just going to go over to my database, and I'm going to go to the External Data tab, and then you can see there's an item here that says Import Excel Spreadsheet. It shows a picture of the Excel icon with an arrow pointing to my database, which tells me it's going to bring the data into my database. If I click on that, I'm going to get a dialog box. And I have several options here. I could import it into a new table. I could add it to an existing table. Or I could link to the data source, which means it's a live link between the two products. But in this case, I'm going to import the source data into a new table in the current database. And I need to browse to choose my file that I want to utilize. I'm just going to grab this item here under week 9. And then I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to take a look at that data set and give me all of the different pieces of information in that data set. And then I can hit Next. And I want to make sure that this, in this case, says first row contains column headings, because each one of those column headings will be established as the field name in my new table. I can hit Next. I can next through this. I will choose my own primary key just because in this case I don't want to use theirs, or I can choose no primary key. This data I have here doesn't really lend itself to a primary key, so I'm just going to leave it off. I'm going to hit Next. It's going to give me a suggested table name. I'll leave it as that and hit Finish. And if I want, I can save the import steps. That's something you would do if you want to repeatedly pull data from that data source. In this case, I'm just doing a one-off, so I'm not going to save the import steps. I hit Close, and you can see I have a brand new table in my database called Order List that has data from one of the tabs in my spreadsheet that I was using as a source of data. So now I have all of this information immediately pulled into my Access database. This is showing a visual of that. Modifying a table in Design View. I think we've pretty much gone over this. I can right-click on this and show it in Design View. This is the new table I just imported, and as I've shown you before, I can edit all kinds of different pieces of information here, data types, field names, as well as properties down here in the bottom part, and we'll get into some of these other properties in more detail later. I can do simple queries of my data using the Simple Query Wizard, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. So I've got my table. I'm just going to go back to Datasheet View.
And I'm going to go to my Create tab, and I'm going to create a query using the Query Wizard. So I'm going to choose Query Wizard, and I'm going to create a simple Query Wizard, the first option that's already selected. Hit OK. And it's just going to say, what table do I want to do my query on? And I'll just do it on the order list table that I've been messing around with. And you can see this is all of the items or the fields that are in that table. And maybe I just want to see customer name and order total in my simple query. I can select those two items. I did it by double-clicking on them. I could also highlight them and use the single arrow to move a single item over one way or the other. I can also do the double arrow if I say, just give me everything on the table. But in this case, I don't want that, so I'm going to move all those back to the left. I'm just going to say customer name, order total, and I can hit next. And I can either show detail or I can show a summary. I hit next. It's going to name the query. I could call this whatever I wanted, and I'll just go ahead and view it and hit finish. And I'm going to have to close my table that I was working on because it won't let me do it otherwise. And then I'm going to view my query. And you can see now I've got my simple query has brought back two of the columns in my table, customer name and order total, just like I asked it to. So it lets me just look at specific parts of my data that I want to see. I can use criterion in my query. So I'm going to go ahead and add some criteria to the query that you just watched me make. So I'm going to go over to my database. And you can see now that I've created that query, I have it on the left here. I've already opened it here. But if I wanted to open this in Design View, I would just right-click on it here and go into Design View. And this is the view that we'll get. We're going to see other things that come up in this kind of a view. But here you can see the only thing in my query is my order list. And then I've got items going across the bottom, which are the two items I chose to include in my query. Now, if I want to add criteria, I can go down to the column that I want to put the criteria on. And criteria is essentially a filtering activity. I can go down to the column that I want to filter on under criteria. And let's say I want to filter for a specific I need to look at my list to see. Maybe I only want to see Ansel Adams in my results instead of seeing Ansel and Bradley. I'll go back over to my query, and in my criteria, I will just say, just give me Ansel Adams. When I click away from that field, you can see it puts quotes around it because it's a text criteria. And now I've got my query the way I want it. I want to go ahead and view it in Datasheet View and run it, and I get nothing. Turned out I got nothing because Ansel Adams wasn't in my query result. So I need to choose Windy Weathers instead. So I'll go back to Datasheet View, and this time I'll put my criteria of Windy Weathers in, and now I will run it, and it will only return customer name Windy Weathers. I can create forms. What a form is a way for you to have a simplified view to add or edit data in your tables without having to look in Datasheet View or Design View. It's just a more user-friendly view of your data. So I'm going to create a form. So I'm back over on my database, and I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to create a form. And I'm going to save my query. That is not how I wanted that to happen. Let me close this. I want to do it off of my order list. So I'm going to select my order list table, and I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to go to Create a Form. And this time I will get a form that is based on my order list table. And you can see the first item here is Ansel Adams. If I go over my order list, you can see the first item here is Ansel Adams. It's just showing this table. It's showing a single record in a view that is more consumable by a user. So if I wanted to edit some part of this, I could. Or if I wanted to change to a different record, I can go through my different records. So if I go down here at the bottom, you can see I'm on record 1 of 12, and I've got these arrows that I can use. So if I hit this arrow, you're going to see the data is changing because I'm going to different records in my table. And then if I want to edit those records, I can. I just have to make sure that I have saved my form before it lets me start editing data using my form. So if I realize this was a pen instead of a pencil, I can change that, and now that change has been committed to my table. So it's just a different view that lets me edit data within my table. I can create reports off of my data. A report is just a consumable view of the information in your table. It would be something that's non-editable. It's just something that you can output to hand to somebody that wants to see what's going on in the data. So I'm going to create a report. So I'm going to first click on my order list because I'm going to create my report off of my order list. And again, I'm going to go to the Create tab, and I'm going to choose Report right here. And it's going to give me a simple report. And I can edit this as I want to, but basically this is just another view of my data. It automatically throws some totals in for me that it thinks I want. In this case, there's really only one total because it's the order total. It's just taking that column and totaling it up for me. Here are some of the edits we can make. So we can modify report column headings and resize the columns if we want to. So right now I am just in view mode. If I hit this pull down here, I can choose layout view, which will let me edit some of the stuff within my my report here. So obviously this column is wider than it needs to be, so I can just grab and shorten up these columns. Just by grabbing them on the right of one of the items, I have the whole column selected. And then I can grab and shorten it up. Maybe I don't want customer name to be customer name. I want to change it to consumer name. Maybe that makes more sense to whoever is reading my report. I can just very quickly change that and just note that I have not changed my table. I have just changed my report. So my table is still going to be called customer name, but whoever looks at my report is going to see it as a consumer name. I can add totals to the report. You saw that it already had that total there, but if I want to, maybe I wanted to total item total. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but in this case, maybe I want to add a total. To do that, I first have to move, right now I'm in layout view, I actually have to move to design view to add a total there. So again, down at my view options here, I go to design view. And this is, I mean, it's not pretty to look at, but it is a design view of my report. And now that I'm in design view, I can add a total to my item total. So I'm going to click on item total. And then under report design tools, design tab, I have this option called totals. It's that summation sign that we saw in Excel when we were doing that earlier. I go on the totals here and I can say sum, and you can see that it adds a total at the end of my report. And then if I go to view, report view, you can see that now I have a total listed down here at the bottom of my report. I can change database properties if I want. That's the same thing we did in Microsoft Excel. So if I go to File and go to this view, I can view and edit my database properties, and there's a list of properties here that I can, if I feel like I want to add them in, I can. Again, this helps you find your database or establish different information about it when you're accessing it from your Windows view. I can back up my database. Sometimes with databases, especially if you get a larger database, regular backups are a necessity just to avoid any kind of database corruption, because there are times when you get in a situation where something is so messed up that you are going to have a hard time being able to recover it. So to make a backup of my database, I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Save As. And then I'm going to leave it on Save Database As, and I have this option here called Backup Database. I'll double-click on that. I already had a table open, so I need to save it, or a report open, so I have to save it. And now it's going to let me do a backup. And you can see what it essentially doing is just a Save As, but it is just saving the database name and appending the date to it. So I know that this backup was done on this date. As I do regular backups, then I would have a different date, so then I can always go back in history and get to a different version of my database if I have corruption or an issue of some sort. Now I have saved my database off, so I don't have to worry about anything getting broken going forward, because I have that backup made. Compacting and repairing a database. This is something that you would periodically want to do, again, as you get a very large database. Compacting and repairing just removes junk from your database, extra stuff that maybe you had something established in a table and you've removed it. Well, that reference to it is still there, things like that. So it keeps your database from slowing down because it's getting unwieldy. It's just a good regular tool if you're keeping a long-term database to periodically do compact and repair. So I can do that on this database. It's kind of pointless on this database because it's brand new and there's very little in it. But if I wanted to do it, I can go to my File menu and I can do compact and repair database. And there you go. I have done a compact and repair on my database. I can also close my database, just like I can anything else. I can rename my database, I can delete tables, or rename objects in my database. I think these are things that we all understand we can do in these tools, being able to edit things after they've already been created. And as far as database design, this is something that in some ways is an art. As you get more comfortable with creating databases, you get better and better at these things. But being able to, when you're sitting down to create a new database, thinking about the things that you're going to need, even just writing it down on a napkin or a piece of paper, like what am I going to require in my database? And you can determine what tables you need and what the primary key should be, what other fields do you really want in those different tables, the relationships between the tables, which is something we'll be getting into in subsequent weeks, and making sure you have the right database types, and dealing with redundancy, because if you're putting the same piece of data in over and over again, that might be a design issue where perhaps another table is more appropriate than continuing to repeatedly type the same piece of information in. That's all I have for this lesson. I know there's quite a bit here, but we really need to get ourselves moving on Microsoft Access because we have several more things that we need to do that are a little more advanced, so everybody needs to have this baseline so we can get started. Thanks.